Hello, everyone. This is Larry Johnson, your host for Eight Principles Voices. And I'm delighted to have with me a young man, and he is young by my comparison, Graeme Watt, who is beaming from Canada, my northern neighbor, Edmonton. It's not exactly snowing there, Graeme. It's a pleasure.
So good to be here, Larry. Looking forward to it.
Well, Graeme runs a marketing agency, and not to bastardize the name, but tell me the name again, Graeme.
Anthem Creative is the agency, and then Anthem Studios is the film studio.
Anthem Creatives almost sounds like going to church, doesn't it, Graeme? You know, um,
A little bit.
you do faith-based clients, you do nonprofit clients. But before we get into what you do, tell me a little bit about how you came to do what you're doing.
Oof. Well, I'll give you the short version of it. I mean, I had a very unusual upbringing. So by the time I was 12, I had been to 24 countries, lived on three continents, spoke three languages, and had this very global view of the world. And I realized that that is quite unique. And so it's really shaped the way that I've approached everything from relationships to life and then, you know, business and career as well. And so I was always looking for what I was going to give my life to. And there's been a couple key moments along the way. One for me that really shaped my trajectory professionally was interestingly enough, a rock climbing accident. So when I was about 21 years old, I had a rock climbing accident, fell over 140 feet from a rock face here in Canada. And, that's one of those things that the doctor told my father, this is a miracle. There's no chance that your son should have survived this. And the rule of thumb is if you fall over 100 feet, then there's a 100% chance of not surviving that accident. So I've kind of taken this approach to life ever since, that every day that I have is a gift. I'm living on borrowed time. So I made a commitment when I was in a wheelchair, for about 6 months after that accident, trying to piece my life back together, that I was going to live for the benefit of others. I didn't know what that looked like at the time, but wanted to give my life for the sake of moving humanity forward, and that's what I pursued ever since, and that's led me to all kinds of wild places, and naturally led me to the nonprofit sector. So that's really where I got started professionally. Was in a local church as a youth pastor. That was kind of the natural first step for me, and then
Mhm.
the progression of that was into more of a nonprofit leadership role. I started a nonprofit organization in my 20s, kind of by accident, and then figured out what this world was and how to register an organization and fundraise and build a board, and really fell in love with the work that we were doing in the sector. And that's kind of evolved into where we are today.
Well, let's rewind a little bit. So you fell,
Yeah.
clear fall, 140 feet. And what did you hit? Rock,
Yeah, I
ground,
did.
water?
I had a brief stop about halfway down. So it was a for any of the rock climbers out there, it was a two-pitch climb, and I was rappelling from the top of the climb. Then the anchor
Mhm.
pulled, and I fell about halfway, hit a ledge about 70 feet down, and then from there another 70 feet or so down to the bottom, where I was kind of wedged between a rock and a log. I remember my first thought was, "Am I dead? Is this what death feels like?" And it took me a couple seconds to orient myself and go, "I think I'm still alive, but I don't know. I don't know how bad it is." So that was a wild experience.
Well, that interruption on the way down is probably a real contributor in helping you
Hmm.
survive. And then you were wedged into a log. It's a little more flexible than that rock. It is a little more cushioned.
Hmm.
But you did have a very near brush with death. There's no question about it. And the fact that you emerged with your senses about you. You didn't have a brain bleed or anything else that would have. Were you wearing a helmet?
I was, yeah, I was.
Okay. Well,
Thankfully, I
that
didn't hit my head on the way down, but yeah, I was.
oof. Okay. And then you said you were in a wheelchair for 6 months.
Roughly, yeah, it was a bit of back and forth, many surgeries and lots of physical therapy and rehab. It was about a year and a half total before I was kind of back up to where I
Ooh.
where I was able to function
Uh,
properly. Yeah.
so you what broke both legs, a back.
Yes, and yes. I broke my right leg. Had contusions on both my heels from the impact at the bottom, three fractures in my spine, and crushed my left hand. Had reconstructive surgery on my left hand, and then a lot of kind of surface issues and bruises and cuts and scrapes all over the place. But
Well,
that was the bulk of it.
God was watching over you, Graham.
Mm.
Well, he apparently got your attention. Um, uh, I'm sure you would have preferred he gotten your attention a little less violently, but sometimes That's what it takes. So what were you going to do beforehand? I mean, did you have any directional? I'm just curious how this really altered your perspective on life because it was near death.
Yeah, it's funny. I was well. There's a couple other pieces to the story. I mean, 2 years prior to that, I was um, really lost and really trying to figure out where to go and what my life was about. Um, and found myself really just kind of desperately looking for meaning and purpose and all of those things that people in their, 18, 19, 20-year-old era are looking for. And, I'd always been in a actually the reason why we moved around so much was my parents were missionaries. So I'd grown up with, parents as missionaries and pastors and was kind of immersed in that world and walked away from that in my late teens and really started kind of searching for this on my own, and then found my way back to faith shortly before that climbing accident. And that was, really a catalyst for me. But then the climbing accident was me going, okay, what do I do with all of this, and where do I go? How do I direct and focus my life and my energy and my talents? And so I was actually in university. I was between my first and second year university, and was studying ecotourism and outdoor leadership. And so, I'd always had a
Okay.
passion for the outdoors. I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I leverage that into a career? And then the climbing accident kind of set me on a bit of a new trajectory. And that's what led me to starting to work with young people and working with youth. And then youth work became kind of a natural next step. Actually, during my university degree, I had the opportunity to go to Australia and work with an outdoor education company in Sydney. And that was really where I fell in love with working with young people and helping them find direction and purpose and using my story and my experiences to help guide them as they make sense of their own life.
So that's interesting. You found your own faith before the accident. We grow up with our parents' faith, and then at some
Mm-hmm.
point it has to become our own. And you were able to do that. And so this is fascinating, Graeme. Now, how old are you now?
42.
Okay, well, you look 32. So there you go. Anyway,
Oh, thanks.
except for the gray hair, I just got to look at that. Of course, at least
That's right. You
you
can see it coming
have
in here.
hair. You have hair. You know,
I'll
when I
take
was
that. I'll take
when
that.
I was your age, I looked like this. Okay, I was gone. It was gone. So, all right. So then you got into you have this Anthem agency. Now, were you the sole founder, a partner? How did that come about?
My brother actually started the agency first. So I had started this organization. It was a grassroots youth engagement movement in Canada. Started with a group of 25 teenagers, turned into something far bigger than I ever had intended. After 5 or 6 years of leading that organization, we were reaching about 15,000 students across the country and, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars that we were now channeling overseas through agency agreements to partner organizations in primarily East Africa and Southeast Asia. And so, that was kind of where I was at. And in the background of that, my brother had his own journey and he found himself leading a summer camp. And so he was the director of a Bible camp for about a, 6 year period, and then kind of transitioned out of that role and was trying to figure out what to do. He had fallen in love with storytelling and creative and marketing during his time at the camp, and he really just saw the impact and the power of branding and storytelling and doing that well. His legacy at the camp that he was at, it was one of the largest in the regions where we live, but his legacy at the camp was they filled every bed in every season. And he credits a lot of that to the work that was put into branding and marketing and just really creative storytelling and engaging, especially using social media and digital technology. And so he then translated that into starting Anthem. So he did the painful work of you know being in the basement by himself, a jack of all trades, doing everything from film work
Mm,
to design work to all of it on his own. um, on my end, the work that we were doing with this grassroots nonprofit, we caught the interest and attention of a larger NGO, and we ended up transplanting what we were doing in a grassroots way into a large organization. And so I found myself going from, I call it from the Zodiac to the aircraft carrier, went from being the captain of my own ship with a small team of 6 or 7 people to, one of the largest organizations on the planet. And so
so
during
so
that
how
time,
so how did that happen? Now you're a young. This is a very
mm,
small embryonic firm,
yeah.
and then you got the attention of a very large anchor client. Now,
Mhm.
were you seeking that? Did they come to you? How did that happen?
No, it was very much a practical um, reality that emerged. So when I was leading the nonprofit, my board became increasingly uncomfortable with the way that we were operating. So in the technical side of things, we were a
which
youth
means
empowerment.
which probably means you're doing your job. Okay, if
Right.
from my experience, that's probably what it meant. You were
If the board's uncomfortable, yeah.
a little too effective for them. Ooh, I thought I was here just to kind of, have donuts and coffee and feel good. You know, um,
Hmm. Well, what ended up happening is, as we grew and were more successful, we were, like I said, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars through agency agreements to small locally led organizations in places like Burundi and Rwanda and Ethiopia. And my board at one point came to me and said, Graham, I think we're behaving like an international relief and development organization when we are a youth empowerment organization. And so which one is it going to be? And I don't know that we want to be both. And ultimately, we felt like there was some risk exposure. We were accountable for the way that our partners on the ground were spending funds, and we didn't have the right infrastructure in place to be able to do
mm-hmm.
that very well. And so, what started happening on my end is my board said, I think we need to start looking for a partner organization in Canada that we can then laterally channel funds towards, that they will then be accountable and responsible for the way that funds
Okay.
are spent and utilized in the developing world. So, it was a very practical, functional piece. Then we would be able to just focus on the youth empowerment side of things and the education and advocacy piece. And so at that time, we started looking for organizations that we could partner with. And just kind of in that same season, I was approached by someone at World Vision Canada, and they said, hey, we've seen what you've been doing. We're really trying to figure out what our youth engagement department is going to look like going forward. 30-hour famine, which had been their kind of staple fundraising program for youth and primary youth engagement tool, was on the decline, and they were looking for new ways and innovative ways to engage young people. So it was a very timely conversation, and I really love the idea of being able to take the model that we had built, that I was very confident in, and transplant it into a much larger platform that was much better resourced. So we went from being able to impact 15,000 students a year to now hundreds of thousands of students a year.
So then later, when you were with Anthem, then World Vision became this anchor client who already had a
That's
relationship with
right.
you. These things just don't drop out of the sky. And I know
Yeah.
that there's always a linkage there. And so they had already a feeling of what you. So that was interesting when you made that leap from running a nonprofit to a creative agency. Ever look back?
No, not at all. I mean, I do have days where I love just the nature of problem solving and figuring out, how to fundraise to your next target and building campaigns. But we get to scratch all of those itches on the agency side. And so, what's really interesting is the transition for me from World Vision to Anthem was that I started hiring Mark, my brother. I started hiring Anthem for projects that we were working on at World Vision. And then we just started working together and collaborating. It
Ooh, a little
ultimately,
nepotism
yeah,
there.
that's it. So, and World Vision, I don't know if they still have this, but they had a program that was an innovation grant. It was internal and a little bit of like a Shark's Tank kind of model, where
Mm-hmm.
once a quarter they would open it up for submissions from staff that you could submit innovation proposals. And so I'm constantly full of these creative ideas and ways that we could do new things. And so I was always submitting innovation proposals. I think I got 3 of them funded during the time that I was there. And then I had the freedom to take the budget that was allocated to that project and then bring in whatever support I wanted. So I started hiring Mark and bringing him in. And that's how we started working together. And ultimately, one of the projects that we collaborated on was a mini documentary that we filmed in Haiti. And so there was a 13-year-old girl that had raised about $35,000 to fund a school in rural Haiti, and she had also been sponsoring a child in that same community for a number of
Okay.
years. So we traveled to Haiti with her and filmed the experience of her meeting her sponsored child and visiting the school that she had helped to fund. So Mark and I really got to link arms on that project. We got home from that and we just thought that was so much fun. I think we should we do this together? And so I very quickly after that quit my job at World Vision, jumped in as a partner with Mark at Anthem, and we have never looked back. We've I think since then worked with about 180 nonprofit clients in the last decade. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary and have built kind
Congratulations.
of a full service team, and now launched a film studio as well. So it's been a wild ride.
So, so you must be serving pretty large nonprofits. I mean, your typical organization is not a startup or anything close to it, correct?
There's been a progression, obviously. In the earlier days, we were really well suited to serving smaller organizations and nonprofits, working directly with executive directors. But over time, we've started to see that the sweet spot for us, as we've grown a team and more expertise, is working with an organization in that sort of 5 to 30 million in annual revenue. The perfect client for us is they have maybe a director of marketing, and a couple of freelancers or maybe some in-house capabilities, but they don't have a design team, they don't have film capabilities, they don't have a web person in-house. And so we come alongside and serve a little bit as an extension of their team, often in a capacity building way, but we really come alongside and help them think through their marketing communication strategy. And then we will help develop campaigns. A lot of the work that we do is also anchored in capital campaigns. And so we've got organizations coming to us saying, hey, our team is already tapped out, we're maxed out, but we've got this capital campaign. We want to really build a brand around it
Do
and launch it
you
well.
do you in those cases do you work with campaign counsel or
Absolutely.
and then so
Yeah.
then the council will hire you and then work with the organization. I guess it works several different ways. What do you do with an organization that their director of marketing is really their fundraiser and doesn't do really marketing at all? And yeah, you have to have run into that. Okay.
Of course, yeah. And there's some philosophical approaches and debates in this too. One of the things that we fundamentally believe is that fund development and marketing communications should really be a hand in glove partnership. And in larger organizations, we often see them competing for budget, for attention, and there's this perpetual chicken and the egg scenario. What matters most? Is it marketing and storytelling, or is it fundraising? And we try and put that debate to bed and say, look, it's actually the two of you working together, linking arms. So we've actually gone so far as to help organizations integrate their marketing communications departments with their fund development teams and allow them to collaborate in a different way that
Mm-hmm.
really helps to amplify the efforts and the results of both of those functions. So, to answer the question, who brings us into a capital campaign, for example? Is it counsel? Do we bring in counsel? It's both. We often, and we've done enough of these campaigns now, that if the organization doesn't have a capital campaign strategist or counsel, we will insist that they bring one in, or we have a number that we work with that we will bring to the table as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of relationships with Capital Campaign Council that will bring us in as well when there isn't the capability to build a strong campaign. So,
Well,
but yeah,
when I was counsel, I always had my favorites for people that did work. I knew what I wanted and who could understand what I was looking for. And for what it's worth, Graeme, the graphic people generally liked me, and the reason why is I knew what I wanted, and there
yeah,
wasn't a lot of back and forth. You got time, next, next, next. There wasn't a lot of navel gazing. Well, you can't do that in a capital campaign, although they like to. Now, I want to ask you, how have you found the decision making process? Nonprofits are notorious for distributed decision making, for having to hold their hand before they go out and buy a newspaper, whatever. How do you, I mean, that drives me friggin' nuts, Graeme. So, how do you deal with it?
it's
I,
it's challenging. It's not easy. We've
I don't do it
built
much anymore. I have a guy that does it for me.
fair enough. Yeah, the decision making part, especially when it comes to creative, and this is one of the things that we wrestle with all the time. Creative at its core is subjective, and
Yes.
so you often have people that are weighing into creative decisions, and it's one of those things that when you go to your accountant, you trust their expertise. You don't really question their abilities as an accountant, um, unless you know a lot about accounting. For some reason, when it comes to creative in particular, everyone feels like they've got an opinion, and it's if you cast a really wide net and your circle, your feedback loop is 12 people deep, and you've got 12 people that are weighing in on the color selection and the logo details. If you ask people to provide you with feedback, they feel as though they need to give you an opinion. And that to me is one of the challenges that we run up against, is if you ask people for their opinion, they feel like they need to give you one, even though they have zero credentials and ability to give you one. I'll give you an example. We have a client that we were working with. We were completely developing their brand from scratch. And, their executive director, a wonderful human being, but at one point he started questioning the color choice. And I remember this very distinctly because we were on a Zoom call with their entire leadership team. and he was asking about the green and going, yeah, I just don't know if it really, represents the heartbeat of what we're trying to do as an organization. And someone on their leadership team said, hey, aren't you colorblind? And he goes, oh yeah, you're right. And it was just this hilarious moment. And we've actually, so like on our website, there's a section on our website where it says don't call us if, and one of the lines that we have there is if colorblind Bill is making the decisions about color. And we joke about that, but that's one of the things with decision making and feedback loops within nonprofits is, you can cast a really wide net, and especially in very top down founder led organizations, it feels as though people
Oh,
that really shouldn't be weighing in are weighing in on those
mm-hmm.
decisions when it comes to copywriting and messaging, when it comes to, creative execution and decisions. And that can be a real challenge. We try in the front end of a project to really set it up and ask the hard question, who's going to be providing feedback and why? Be very selective with those individuals. Why are they specifically going to be offering feedback into the creative process? And we try and limit that to three as
Well,
much as possible.
well, I'm not an expert at these things, but I do know that different colors evoke different emotions and different reactions. And there's been a lot of research on that. And different colors symbolize certain things. Red symbolizes love, passion. Yellow signifies weakness, cowardice. I mean, there are all these sort of associations with colors,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, and I'm when I've worked with individuals like yourself, I kind of know what I like, but I'm really open to an interpretation. And what I try to do is I would describe to you the reaction I'm looking for. This is what I'm trying to evoke. So
Mm-hmm.
you take that and come back with something that you think is going to do that for me, you know. But I don't. Oh, I know what the micromanaging. It's just like, and you go ahead. You
But
want to tell me
what
war
you
story?
no, it's no, what you just described is to me the essence of branding. And so our definition of brand is not, the colors and the words that you use. It's not even what you communicate. It's how does it make people feel,
Mm-hmm.
and what story do they tell themselves about who they are when they interact with your brand. And
Perfect.
I think
Yeah.
that's one of the fundamental errors that organizations make is they think that branding is about them. How do they represent themselves and communicate their message? I think it's fundamentally about who are we trying to reach, and how does our brand and our message make them feel, and what story does it allow them to tell themselves about who they are and what they care about.
I tell people, see, fundraising is my gig, all right, in
Yeah.
philanthropy. And I tell people the same thing. I will tell nonprofits, first of all, you have to understand it's not about you. Okay. I'm sorry. It's just not about you. And worse, it's not even about your mission or the wonderful work you do. Sorry, get over yourself. What it's about are those individuals who are willing to step up and invest in the organization. And they're investing materially, but they're expecting an intangible return. You see,
Mm-hmm.
it's not, they're not just giving to you because you're a great person. I'm sorry. That's just not the reason. So you need to find out why is it they're investing in you? And as you know, it's usually some variation on sort of a sense of significance of accomplishment. That's what they're looking for, a part of a larger
Mm-hmm.
community, all these things. And people would say, well, how do I know? I said, well, you can start by asking them. I mean, that there's a nice place to start. And 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 they will tell you generally if you're honest about it. There's I must tell you this. I may have told you this story. I'm going to use it in a conference. I'm thing a conference session I'm doing next week. You know, first of all, donors will absolutely throw money at you if you can give them an experience, whatever you want, however you want to call that, that you can't buy, that the average person just cannot buy. I mean, they will throw money at you because it's something that's so unique and it's not really equated to what they gave. Then the other
Mm-hmm.
thing is, um, I worked. I did the. I worked on the major gifts program for SUNY Buffalo a number of years ago. They were just getting started, and a number of their alumni were in the what computer tech world, and they were out in Northern California, and I would go visit them. And one of the gentlemen I visited, who at the time was old enough to be my father, he was one of the original founders of that little company called Intel. All right,
Mm.
and it, he was a delightful person. Got to know him over about a year and a half, and I could tell you all kinds of stories about him. But at one point, here I am, and he knows what I'm there for. He knows, I didn't make it about money, but he knows this is my job. And at one point, he says to me, Larry, I'm um, I'm really concerned about giving you a significant gift. And for him, that meant five figures up, anything that was more than a rounding error. Okay. And of course, when you hear that and you're in higher ed, you begin to think, okay, did the president piss him off? Did he read something in the student newspaper? What else is going on here? And so I said, well, why is that? And he said, I'm afraid if I do that, you won't come and visit me again.
Mm-hmm.
Was it about the money? No.
Mm. Right.
No. Was it about the gift? No, it was about our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell that story because that's what donors, investors really want, and they're especially the serious ones. The
Yeah.
serious ones aren't really that interested in their name and lights. They really prefer to be rather modest about it. They don't want to attract attention to themselves because attention like that is almost always unwanted, and not of the kind you thought you were going to get. Um,
Yeah.
so,
My fundraising mentor, he was the chair of my board when I started the organization years ago, and still to this day we work with him. We bring him as counsel for a lot of our campaigns. Two lessons that he drilled into me. The first one is that people don't give to organizations; they give through organizations towards outcomes that they care about.
mm-hmm,
And if you can connect your outcomes to theirs, then they will give gladly. And the second piece that he taught me, and I mean, he used to do this with me when I would meet with him and I would tell him, hey, I'm going to meet with a potential major donor or someone who I think could really advance our mission in a significant way. And if I would have that meeting, he would call me afterwards and say, how did it go? And then we would talk about it. And then he would say, did you ask them to give? And if I didn't, he would, I remember him waving his finger in my face and saying, Graeme, how dare you? You rob them of the opportunity that comes, you rob them of the opportunity to experience the joy that comes from generosity and giving. And that was not yours
absolutely.
to take. And so those are two things that I really carried with me all the way through the work that we do now as well in fundraising is connecting outcomes to passion and this idea of, experiencing joy. I think sometimes as a major gift fundraiser in particular, you can feel awkward and you're asking people for money and it can feel transactional. But when you reframe that to saying this is creating a pathway for them to experience joy that comes from being
Mm-hmm.
generous, it can change the way that you approach fundraising entirely.
Absolutely. One thing that I try to do is early on connect what I'm there for with their fundamental interests.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll say, so Graeme, what is it you'd like to accomplish? And you're going to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be something totally off the wall. It could be something close to what I'm saying, but there's almost always a way to bring the conversation into the direction you'd like it to go. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right. People want that opportunity to be generous. Lately, I've run into some organizations that, oh no, we don't ask people. We just think, I'm like, what? What? I mean, oh, we just, if I go too far, I'm going to say something I'm going to regret. But um, and especially, and I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a faith driven man, and yet some of our faith organizations, that's just a matter between you and them and the Holy Spirit. We're not going to get into that. Excuse me. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened to including someone and having them feel generous and you're not putting them on the spot. I mean, you're not bill collecting. I mean, if you're doing that sort of thing, well then yeah. And the next time they see
Mm-hmm.
you, they'll cross the street and they were anywhere near you. But it's where it comes from. It comes out of with their discomfort of asking, not
Right.
not the other person.
Well, and I read a study recently, and I don't, I'd have to look back at where it came from and who conducted it, but it was an analysis of the motive and the reason why people give, and has it changed in the last 20 years. And so it was looking at previous studies of, why do people give, and has that changed, especially in modern times with new technologies emerging? Have people, fundamentally changed the motive and the reason why they give to charities? And after this long, in-depth study, the summary and the top two reasons why people give was, one, because there's a need that was clear, and then two, because somebody asked them. And, there's all these thoughts about, and at the end of the day, I just don't know that humans fundamentally change, and
No.
a lot of their motives and ways of thinking, and the psychology behind it. And so there's still, from a fundraising perspective, that fundamental piece of, if you can make a need clear and shout it from the rooftops, people who care about that will go, wow, I would love to learn more. And then at some point, someone has to ask them. And I feel that often, if you don't ask me to give, I don't know that you need me to. And you might understand that the need is there, but I don't know how you need me to partner with you and contribute towards it. And so to be really clear and specific with that. And I think that's, sometimes going back to the basics is what organizations need to do. And it's easy to get caught up in, conversion rate optimization on your, fundraising pages, and how do we use AI to publish more content? And, at the end of the day, it's are you clearly communicating the need, and are you asking?
Mm-hmm. Well, and depending on the audience, I'll pick a gentleman out of the audience, and I'll say, so did your wife just marry you? Well, oh, well, you had to ask, didn't you?
I know where you're going with this.
Even if the answer was obvious, she expected you to ask her. Ask me. I want to be asked. And then, of course, it always helps if you have the ring handy. So they expect to be asked. It's the same thing with donors. The bride expects to be asked. And there's this. You may be familiar with the film Chariots of Fire. A number of years ago, there's a scene where Abrams and the professional coach that he's trying to engage, Sam Messambini, they're in a pub. And of course, Abrams is all over this guy, trying to get him to agree. And at one point he says, Mr. Abrams, like the bride, it's the coach that does the asking. Like, I'll ask you if this is going to work, and it's just, it's just what you expect. So tell me a little bit about, now you're probably beyond this now, because you're serving larger organizations that don't have some of these difficulties, hangups, whatever. Things like ROI, understanding what that is, they don't see everything as an expense. With smaller organizations, every single thing is an expense, and they don't understand the difference between something that's going to multiply what they've put into it and something that's simply going to be just a dead expense. Well, when you had to deal with that, how'd you get around it?
Well, we still deal with it. I think there's always scrutiny, especially when, the economic environment is unstable and there's uncertainty. Everything gets scrutinized. I think this is the nature of nonprofit as well, when you're dealing with donor dollars in particular. And so we see a fundamental difference. If there are organizations that are primarily grant funded or government funded, there's a different level of scrutiny on spending versus organizations that are donor funded, because of the stewardship component that comes into that. We feel that at a deep level. So I think even our team's approach often is to say, we're here to help you do more with less. And we're here to, amplify your impact and not just drain your resources without having any clear return on that investment. And so there's a lot of critical thinking that needs to go into it up front. And a lot of times, once we get into a really good rhythm and trusting relationship with the client, when we're able to at the front end say, okay, what is your budget? And they may not know what that is. And sometimes we can help to shape that, right? It's like, okay, well, what do you mean? What's our budget for marketing or for campaigns? And we can look at that and go, well, here's some benchmarks and some standards. And what would you be willing to invest into this? And what's the expected outcome and result from that? And then we can help align whether that's realistic or not. And I think that's one of the conversations that we often have. We actually have, in the last 2 years, developed this process that we put most of our clients through. It's a sprint. It's a 1 day sprint that we call a strategic inevitability sprint. And we put them through this 4-part framework. And one of the elements of the framework is really aligning their goals and desired outcomes with their capabilities and capacity as an organization. And it's all well and good to, dream and think of your big, hairy, audacious goal, but then you have to anchor those things to the capabilities and the capacity of your organization from a human talent perspective, from a budget and resource perspective, and looking at all the limiting factors on the organization. And, that resource allocation and budget and, the ROI conversation really comes to life there to say, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish in the next 12 months? And we focus on a 12-month window. And then we go, okay, great. What resources do you have to deploy against that? And are they adequate? Are they going to match? Because otherwise you have to then realign your expectations, because sometimes we have clients that come with a big, bold, ambitious idea and they go, we want to launch a recurring gift program and we want to, get 1,500 new monthly donors in the next 12 months. And we go, okay, great. I love that. That's fantastic. And then we start reverse engineering that and pulling it apart and then going, do you have the ability to make the investment required to build the infrastructure and the capacity that will make it possible for that goal to become inevitable? And that's the strategic inevitability component, is to say, if you want to acquire 1,500 new monthly donors in the next 12 months, then what would need to be true of your organization today? And what would you need to do and execute with enough consistency and expertise in the next 12 months to make that result inevitable? And do you have what it's going to take to do that? And so often we help hold up a mirror to organizations and say, great, I think that based on what you're telling me of your capacity, your capability, your budget, your talent, all of those things, I think that should be 500 in the next 12 months rather than 1,500. And let's really run at that as a benchmark. And then that starts to give us, a really clear sense of what the realistic capability of the organization is. And that's one of the ways that we get around that, is we get in the room up front and we develop this 12-month roadmap through our strategic inevitability framework. And that helps us to really ground, our dreaming, our goal setting in the realm of capability and reality. And we do try and stretch as much as possible. We're not the wet blanket that says, no, you're not going to be able to do that. But we've just seen too many organizations come to us, and they said, oh, we've got all these, we built a marketing plan and we don't really know what to do with it. And we've just been spinning our wheels and we've got these big goals, but we're not making progress.
And you're trying hard not to say, why don't we just put that in the trash and start over?
That's it. Well, we've had far too many organizations come to us and say, we've spent $50,000 on this marketing plan from an agency that doesn't know anything about nonprofit.
$50,000. They've already put that money in. And the firm they hired had no prior experience with the nonprofit community.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
Doesn't know anything about fundraising. And they have not considered the capability of the organization in building a plan. And so you equip an organization with a marketing roadmap that in theory sounds great, but they don't have a hope in the world of actually executing it. Because you haven't done an analysis of their capabilities, their resources, and their capacity. And so you have to bring these things together. And that's the part that, and you can see I'm getting fired up about it because it just happens so often. Instead, what we've decided to do is, forget the 3-month long $50,000 marketing plan. Let's get in the room for 1 day and let's build a roadmap that is going to be really, clear on goal setting, a deep understanding of your actual capabilities and capacity. And then let's work backwards using this strategic inevitability framework. And let's figure out what are all the things you need to focus on and do in the next 12 months that make those goals and that result inevitable.
Okay. You've got me sold, Graeme. I want you to take a moment and select a story that you'd like to share with us, something that will leave everyone on a hopeful note. Maybe it's an organization that came to you as, oh, these people are next to hopeless. How are we going to help these people? And you can change the names to protect the guilty, and just kind of give me a little window on the way your brain thinks.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. I think there's a couple go-to stories. I'll start with this one. It's a smaller organization, and I think it's easy to go to the big exciting examples where they had a big budget and you got a big result. But I think this story is one of my favorites just because it represents, I think, something that can really resonate and be identified with, especially executive directors of smaller organizations. So I was speaking at a conference. I met this woman. She's the executive director of an association that supports foster families and foster parents. And they do a lot of advocacy work, a lot of education, and they're really helping foster parents navigate a complex system and help them better to advocate for themselves and for the child and children that they're caring for. She came to me and we met at this conference. We had a great conversation. She follows up, and a couple of days later, we get on a Zoom call. And I'll never forget this moment. I said, "Hey, how you doing? Great to meet you at the conference. Sounds like you've got a lot going on." I could feel that she was very overwhelmed and heavy. And she looks at me and she says, "I think I need a video." And there was this hanging question mark. I think I need a video. And then she kind of put her head in her hands and just sort of like slumped. Um, and I said, "Okay, let's back up a little bit. Why do you think you need a video? What's going on?" And, she was on the verge of tears. And then when we started to pull at that thread, she said, "Here's the deal. I've just worked on a 3-year strategic plan with my board. And in that strategic plan, there are 9 strategic pillars and 38 strategic goals. And I haven't the single idea of where to start and what to do next. I don't
Nine
know what
anchors and how many goals? 30 something goals?
38 strategic goals."
Yeah.
And she said, "I just don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to direct my team's focus. I don't know how to allocate my budget. I don't know what matters most. And we're just dipping our toe in the water here, here, and here, but we're going a mile wide and an inch deep and not really making any progress anywhere. And I just need help." And so we started with, "I think I need a video," to, "I don't know where to start or what to do next." And so ultimately what we did is we got her and her board in the room. We ran our strategic inevitability sprint. We took those 38 strategic goals, we moved them through our process, and we arrived at a 12-month execution plan that gave her all the clarity that she needed in order to direct her team, in order to shape her budget and where it was going to be allocated. And then we, on the back end of that sprint, partnered with them to develop a number of initiatives. So we started with a rebrand of the organization. We launched a new web platform, completely clarified their messaging and how they're engaging with their members and their audience. We built a back-end member portal. We built an onboarding experience for new foster parents that begins the process of educating them about how the association can help to serve their needs and how they can access support at the right times. We ran a nomination campaign to help bring some exposure and awareness to foster families in our province and the great work that they're doing, and help them feel seen and heard, and also bring in new members as well. We developed a 10-part film series that helps foster parents overcome some of the common challenges that they're going to face in their journey of fostering. And we're now actually in production with a mini documentary film about the state of foster care in our province, and trying to reshape the narrative around foster care and bring new foster parents into the system to help meet the growing needs. So that's one of my favorite stories, because we started with overwhelm. We started with an executive director who's
So tell
not
me,
sure where to go next and what to do.
how does a small nonprofit afford that? That's a lot of work, Graeme. And something strikes me
Absolutely.
that you're not free.
No, and well, and part of that is they had the resources. They just didn't really
Oh,
know. And so, I mean, in terms of capability, there also are a lot of grants available. And this is where their executive director was able to leverage, a relationship with the Minister of Children and Family Services locally,
yeah.
and was able to get a grant for the work that we're doing. And so, the minister was so compelled by the plan that we had put forth that he said, absolutely, because
Okay.
his primary focus and emphasis is, new foster parents coming into the system to meet the growing demand. And he said, "Great, this looks like it, and we'll move us in that direction." So she was then able to access more funding to be able to support these initiatives.
I
And
see.
interestingly enough, so just last week, I was in the room with their board and new executive director doing another sprint to map out our next 12 months. What are our priorities and what are we going to focus on going forward? And now we're dreaming up all kinds of new initiatives and things that are going to help further
Okay.
support and empower the foster parents that they're working with. So,
So
when you
so how
start
much
up front by
so
asking,
so is this sprint like a day long thing or a week or just one day? Is that what it is?
It's one day. So there's a whole lead up. There's about 2 weeks of discovery up front. One of the things that we do is we say, all right, give us all your documentation. We have a couple of pre-sprint conversations where we really get as much context as we can. I'm actually running one of these sprints tomorrow with our team, and we get, really gritty in the first phase. So the first phase is the discovery, learning. We want to get in the room just really fully up to speed on where the organization's at and what the key needs are. And then that one day is about 8 hours. It's full on. It's really intense, very interactive, and we then run this process through in the day. And
And
then by
who's
the end of the
there?
day,
And who's there? Who's
so
present?
on the client side or on our side or both?
On the client side. On the client side, who
On
shows
the
up?
client side, it really depends on what their goals are. So, if it's really specifically focused on marketing, then it will be their
Hmm.
director of marketing and, perhaps their fund development lead. We again try and always integrate fund development and communications and marketing. So whenever we can get the person who's leading their fundraising efforts in the room with the person leading their marketing efforts and get everyone aligned on the plan and the priorities for the next 12 months, that's really the sweet spot. We will sometimes have board members, but that's only when there's more of a governance conversation that's happening. We try and stay in our lane as much as possible. And if it is going to be a governance focused sprint, we will then bring in a consultant who's got expertise in board governance.
So the marketing and fundraiser, what about the executive? Are they included if they're the decision maker?
Absolutely. Yeah. And whenever
Okay.
possible, we have them in the room. Those are the most effective sprints when you've got the decision maker. So you've got the executive director, you've got the marketing director, and you've got your, director of fund development or your
Hmm.
fund development person. And then beyond that, you can have a designer in the room, you can have others. We find that the best is about 5 people on the client side. And then we've got 3 facilitators on our end typically, and that
Okay.
can shift and change. The one I'm doing tomorrow, we've got a fund development consultant coming in, like a fundraising consultant who's coming into that sprint, just because their primary focus is on developing the infrastructure around the fund development team. So we then bring in an expert in that area, and they're walking alongside and providing advice and insight as well.
Okay. So what percentage of your clients, in rough terms, are faith-based?
I would say about 80 to yeah, about 80% would be faith-based
Okay.
clients.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you find that's different about them from your just your typical run-of-the-mill nonprofit?
That's a great question. I don't know that there are really obvious significant material differences. I do think that they often come at it from a different angle. And so when it comes to, the mission, the mandate, and the heartbeat of the organization, and
Mhm.
faith-based organizations come in every stripes and colors and shapes,
Oh
right? So
yes.
you can
Oh yes.
you can be a faith-based international relief and development organization, or you can be a church, and they're going to be dramatically different in the way that they operate. I do think that we see with faith-based organizations, there's a little bit, there's a passionate element that often lives,
Hmm.
at the surface in a different way. There can sometimes be a little bit more of a naive approach, and a little bit more, we're going to pray and rely on God's provision versus a little bit more of a strategic, pragmatic approach. And so that's one of the things that we face. And often we're bringing more strategic value to those relationships with faith-based clients because we're saying, we love your mission, we love the passion, we love the ambition that you have. Let's ground that and anchor it in really sound strategy, and let's build a plan together.
Well,
And
I often use the parable of the 10 talents. We're
mm,
expected to use our abilities.
yeah,
We're expected to be productive, not to sit passive and hope for the best, hope slash pray for the best. In fact, the servant that used that approach didn't do so well. He was doing it out of fear more than anything.
yeah. Hmm.
But so you've gotten pretty adept at kind of guiding people away from that sort of thing. I want to have you one of my new next meetings. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, we've found, and we didn't intentionally niche into the faith-based nonprofit side of things, but I sometimes will say you would never take your child to a veterinarian. So why would you take your nonprofit to an agency that doesn't understand the fundamental reasons why you exist as an organization? And
Hmm.
so it's a natural fit. Like half of our staff are former pastors or have worked in ministry
Oh,
roles or
really?
nonprofit organizations that are faith-based. Absolutely. So,
Okay.
we bring a level of depth and understanding, and we often have our clients, and this is a natural kind of piece of feedback that we hear, and this is one of my favorite things about the work that we do. Organizations that are 20 years old that will come to us, and we will go through a rebranding process. And after we've done all of our, brand exercises and all those things and presented messaging to their senior leadership team, we often get the feedback that you have captured for us what we do in ways that we've never been able to do in 20 years. And I think some of
Okay.
that is because of our understanding of the faith-based space and, that language. And I think there are very few agencies out there like us that have the depth of knowledge and understanding and expertise in that area and can match that with world-class creative execution. So we kind of bring this 1-2 punch of, oh no, you as a faith-based organization, we speak that language. We understand, and this is the other piece, we understand who you're trying to market to and reach. We
Hmm.
understand the way that they think. We understand the heartbeat of people that are giving from a place of, faith of their as their motivation for giving. And so we're able to, frame and shape the work of your organization and the campaigns that you're running through the lens of what it is they need to hear from you.
With the professionalism that you bring.
Correct.
That's the key. That's the key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yes, we could talk forever. All right. Um, uh, well, I really enjoyed this, Graeme. I don't know
Yeah,
about
it's fun.
you. We'll have to do it again, and I'll give you some really tough questions to answer next time.
I love that.
This was the softball. Okay, so is there anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked, or you just like to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, and I won't get into the nuances of it, but as my time gets freed up more in the day to day, I'm now starting to think through things on a new level. When I joined my brother and I said yes to leaving World Vision and jumping into the agency world, when I really didn't know anything about this world, the one thing I said to him, I said, Mark, I really want to help organizations navigate the digital revolution that we're living through. And I think that there is digital disruption happening. And this was 10 years ago. Um, and I look at the world now, I look at the landscape, I look at where things are trending. I'm starting to think through this in a new way. I'm calling it the Great Collision. But I think as a society and as humanity, we are starting to face disruption and technological revolution in ways that I really believe are unprecedented. And I'm
Hmm.
starting to think through what are the implications of this for the nonprofit sector. And so that's one of the areas that we're going to be moving into more, not just from a thought leadership perspective, but actually, how do we help nonprofit organizations not fall behind? Because when you have the collision of things like humanoid robotics and AI technology and blockchain and cryptocurrency, and you've got biotechnology emerging and lifespan increasing, and you have this massive tsunami of wealth transfer that's coming, all of these things colliding with one another, I think, have profound implications for all of us as human beings, but the nonprofit sector in particular. And so we're starting to think through that and how can we really walk alongside organizations and help lead them through it and guide them through it to not operate out of fear, but really understand what's happening and be able to tap into it and leverage it in a way that advances their mission rather than leaving them behind and becoming irrelevant.
And this is with organizations who may have just recently discovered that they've mobily adapted their website.
That's it, right? When we started this 10 years ago, there was, we were constantly having debates of whether or not organizations should be on social media or not.
Hmm.
When the corporate world had already decided 5, 6 years ago that that was, what they were going all in on. And so there's this lag often that happens in the nonprofit sector. And
Oh, yeah.
I want to be the one who's sounding the trumpet and saying, hey, there is this massive digital revolution that's happening and there is opportunity everywhere if you know where to look for it. But there are also, there's a rate of change that is coming so quickly that if organizations are not able to adapt, then there is going to be pain and suffering. I'm also very much the optimist on the hopeful side of things. I think that a lot of what is happening is going to lead to really significant increased need in society that nonprofits will need to step up and serve in a greater way. I also think that the resources will be available with massive wealth creation coming in the areas of AI and cryptocurrency. So I think what I'm trying to think through is what are the implications of all of this? What does it mean for nonprofits in various verticals and sectors, and how can they position themselves to better meet the needs that are coming and better resource themselves to do that and equip themselves to be on the front end and catch the wave of digital revolution rather than paddling behind it.
All right. Well, I'm going to challenge you, Graeme. Here's what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
It just occurred to me. We're going to organize another one of these, but instead of just two talking heads like you and me, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to get, you know, two or three, maybe four other nonprofit CEOs, and
Yes,
it's going to be Ask Graeme. It's what it's going to be, and we're going to have a lively discussion. Are you up for that?
I would love that. Yeah, that would be so fun. So fun.
Okay. All right. That's what we'll do. Thank you, Graeme, for taking time today to do that. And thank you, audience, for being here. And I meant what I said. We're going to do this again. And Graeme's going to be the answer man, or at least the discussion man. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back with you soon.